Hello and welcome. My name is Sam Goodman. I am the tutor team lead of our School of Design, Architecture, and Art tutor team. I'm a fifth-year architecture student. I kind of specialize in advanced 3D modeling, specifically through Revit and Rhino. So today we're going to be talking about Rhino 6, and I'm going to give you kind of a brief overview of the basics, as well as sort of my typical workflow. So we'll start with kind of an introduction to the interface, and then kind of an intro to modeling, sort of through the hierarchy of geometry, and then maybe a couple additional commands, and then I'll show you maybe a little bit of example work for you to just sort of get an idea of the capabilities of this program. So without further ado, I guess we'll just jump right in. So here we have the Rhino 6 interface. If you open Rhino, you should see something like this. You see these 4 windows. It's interesting because whatever is modeled in this space, you can have multiple kind of images of it all at the same time. So let's say if we had a box here, just like that, you'd be able to see it, in each of these views all at the same time, right? And don't worry, I'll get into what I'm actually doing here later. But, so if you move it, you can see it moves in various directions accordingly. So you can kind of gauge, elevations or perspective views and work between the two for absolute accuracy. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. So in Rhino, you have a few things. You have your command bar up here, and then you have a set of various ribbons and buttons along here, as well as some trays on this side. So I like to keep my workspace kind of set up like this. If yours doesn't look like this, all these tools should be here. You can just click and drag them around and, order them accordingly, whatever works best for you. I have a couple additional plugins installed, so those, show up in addition to the other ones, but you don't have to worry about that. And then over here, you're going to want your properties, layers, are kind of the main ones. And then the other ones are kind of additional, and we'll get into those in future tutorials. But to change them, you have a little options over here. So if you don't see a properties and a layers tab here, go down here and just make sure that these are checked on, properties and layers, right? So that's this gear up in the top. Right, so you might notice your Rhino is a lot lighter, or it doesn't look exactly the same color as here. So what you can do to do that is you can type options. And again, Rhino is a command-based software. So what you should get used to is just typing in what you want to do. And you'll get an idea of kind of what works best and, how, you'll have a running list of commands kind of in your head once you kind of get good at the program. So you'll type options, and that will bring up this tab here. So you have this window. Within the window, you can go to appearance. Clicking on appearance, you can change these 3 colors here. That changes the color of your, your command prompt up here. All that is from these, right? And then within the appearance tab, you can go to colors, and these are the colors that inform your workspace here, right? And your, windows and all that. So I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to say it's right there. So if you want to change the appearance, you can mess with that. Right, so beyond that, within options as well, I would also go to mouse here, and then within mouse, the only thing you need to have clicked on is this button right here, middle mouse button, most recently used commands pop-up menu. I think that's one of the best default, well, it's not default, but the best custom little changes to your default settings that you can have on. And I'll show you later what exactly that does. But just have that on for now, and you should be good to go. You can also set up custom commands and things like that. Everything that you need is within the Rhino options if you want to customize the program. But aside from that, you can also type units. And within that, also in the Rhino options and document properties, you can set your units to inches, and then feet in inches if you want, or if you like to work with decimals, you can do that instead. And just hit OK. Right. So within here, you also have a grid, right? You can see that this grid measures some sort of divisions. So every major line is, light, and every minor line is dark. I like to have mine so I really only see the major lines. And in this case, if you were to make a line, right, you can see the distance there is 1 inch. Right, so I'll do that again. It's at the bottom left. You can see that it's 1 inch, right? So the grid interval of those is just 1 inch every space, right? And you can set that custom by typing grid, simple as that. And you can say, grid properties. So up here, you get the options to choose, exactly what you want it to set as. You can say to show it or to not show it. You can say the extents, right? So it goes out 50. And then I say minor line spacing at 0.25. So that's 1/4 of an inch, right? So, this is if you were modeling something kind of small. If it's used for architectural purposes, you might want to set your units instead to feet right here, and then feet and inches. Hit OK, hit yes, and that'll scale everything accordingly. Cool. So from here, we can just kind of, I guess, throw a couple things in here. So we'll get into the actual modeling in a second, but for the time being, let's just say you want like a shape of some sort. I gotta move this a little bit because. Okay, you can click this, say let's just make a box, right? So you can either click that or you can type box, and that'll ask you to make the first corner, and then second corner, and then the third, right? And that lets you just sort of build a shape. Now, that's one box there, right? And let's just make another box, whatever size you want. Right here, and then we could make another one here, right? So we have 3 boxes. What's important in Rhino is to keep things sorted in layers. So you have properties, which if you have an object selected in the properties tab, it'll tell you everything about it. It's a closed extrusion. It's on this layer. It has that display color, yada, yada. You're really just looking at the type and the layer, right? So for example, let's put this one on the red layer. Let's put this one on the blue or purple layer, and then this one on the blue layer. And then we'll go to the layer tabs, right? So this is where, layers are very important, right? So up here you have layer 1. These little light bulbs, you can turn them on and off. So if you're working on different things and don't want to see some of one layer, you can just flip them on and off, just like kind of most design software. You can also lock them, right? So if you lock the blue layer, now I can't click the blue box. Or you can select multiple at a time, turn them all off, right? So there's just kind of some capacities there as far as sorting your model. And when things get complicated later on, when you actually have a full working architectural model in here or anything that you're trying to build on, it's important to keep things organized. You can also rename layers by double-clicking or right-click, rename layer. So we could just call that red, or you could call it floors, right? If you want to turn your floors or your walls or anything like that on, you can just kind of keep things organized that way, right? So you can also just sort of make a new layer, right? And then name it whatever you want. Or you can make a new sublayer here. So within floors, you could say floor 1, right? And then, make another sublayer, and that could be called floor 2. And let's say, this blue layer was on floor 1, and purple is on floors, and then if you turn floors off, it would turn them both off, but then you could also have the capacity to turn just floor 1 off, right? So you can kind of see how, it's pretty elementary, but it's good to keep things organized there. Cool. So beyond layers, let's just talk about the gumball for a second. So the gumball is this little thing that you see showing up, this crazy little blue, green, and red arrow with these different things. So it's kind of the really snappy way to sort of model quickly and move things around and customize it, and make just very simple transformations to an object quickly and efficiently. So down here, if you don't see it on, you can just click it at the bottom of your screen here. It says Gumball, right? So you can click that on and off. So if you have it on, you have a couple different things. You have these arrows, so those will move the object in one direction. And also, you know, Control Z is undo, Control Y is redo, typical. So if you want to move these relative to the construction plane, which is what this grid is, you can just sort of move things around that way. You can also rotate them or scale them in one direction. If you click one thing once, right, if you click this arrow, instead of just click and drag, you can just click it once and type in 10, and that means you want to move it 10 feet up. So you can do it with a numeric input that way. Same thing with rotating. If you want to rotate it 45 degrees, click, type in 45, enter, it'll rotate 45 degrees. Same thing with scale. If you want to scale it, you know, squish it in by the green dimension by, you know, 0.5, you know, half the size, just type in 0.5 and it'll squish it down 0.5. Same thing, scale it bigger, 2 times the length, right? It's really that easy as far as just manipulating one solid geometry really quickly. If you hold shift while using the scale, you can do it uniformly, right? So if you want to make a cube that's twice the size, hold shift, click the scale, and then just type in a 2, and it'll just, the whole thing will be twice the size. Cool. So that's kind of everything that you need to know as far as, you know, basic use of the gumball and moving shapes individually. We'll talk about snaps here real quick. So let's say we had another box, right? Let's just make it a blue box. What we could do is if we wanted to snap it to the grid so we're constantly moving in like 1 foot intervals, we can just select it. We can type move, or you can select this icon over here. You really just kind of have to get used to what the icons look like. I prefer commands because I know the words and it's very simple. You know, copy, you type copy. Move, you type move. Scale, you type scale, right? Instead of having to search through these little icons and pick out what's what. I mean, I kind of fluctuate between the two. There's certain things that I like to type. There's certain things that, you know, might have a really long word that I don't want to have to spend typing, so I'll just select the button. Right, so I'll just type move. And if you, so OSnap down here, if you turn OSnap on, what that does is it gives you these options. Now, whether you've used AutoCAD or anything else, you know that you can snap to certain points of geometry by having these various snaps on, right? So you have an endpoint. I'm kind of in the way there. Let me sort of move this over. Right, so you have an end, like a near, mid, intersect, perpendicular, and then vertex. Those are the ones I like to have on. The others are, you know, kind of circumstantial, so I don't really like to have them on that much. But, you know, so if you want to snap to an endpoint of like a line, right? So let's say move, right? So you type move, hit enter. And then once you're hovering over the shape, you'll find it'll kind of give you a readout of the snap that it's using, right? If it says near, that means the point is near the line, or it really means on the line. If it says mid, that's at the midpoint of that section of this box. If it says end or intersection, right? End means it's an endpoint of that one segment, right? And then intersect means it's where multiple lines come together, which in this case, the edges of a shape are also determined as lines, or what Rhino calls curves. More on that later. So if we have those snaps on, oh, there we go. What we can do is we can just click. So click the end. And if we have grid snap on down here, same thing. So if we go move with grid snap on, it's got to be on as well as OSnap. You can click the edge, and then you can see it's like it's snapping to the grid, right? So I can put it right on the origin, or if I move, also quick tip, repeat last command is spacebar, right? So if I had moved it, the last thing I did was move, you can hit spacebar, move it again. Also, the reason I had you change that mouse button earlier is that if you click your middle mouse wheel, you'll get this list right here, right? So these are the most recently used commands. This is the most like the littlest but most helpful trick that I can give you is that middle mouse wheel to last commands, because it'll, you can go Control Z for undo, Control Y for redo, or move. And you can select it and then move it, right? So if we didn't have the grid snap on, and we're trying to snap to the grid, and we try to move it, right? You'll see we can be in between stuff, and then you're not being super accurate, right? But if you have your grid set up at the right intervals, you can turn your grid snap on, and then you can just move your object to those various spots, right? So that's just a good way to keep things clean and concise and by consistent intervals, right? You never build a building by approximate, dimensions for the most part. You keep things by quarter inches or inches or, half a foot, at least for actual designs. That way, when you actually produce the documents later, you know the actual dimensions. It's just good to keep things clean. Also, a quick thing with this O-snap, I like to actually have mine off, because there's a trick where if you have it disabled here, you can click this disable button there, and then if you type move and you select that and then hit enter, right, the command prompt will always walk you through the steps, right? So if you type move, it says select the object to move. So you click the box, and then it says press enter when you're done. You hit enter, and then it says point to move from. You can then select the point, but if you notice, I'm not snapping to it because I disabled the snaps. But if you hold Alt, it allows you to it turns the snaps on, right? So it's kind of like you can have this sort of free form movement unless you want to snap to something. Then you hold Alt, and then you click that, and then you can move it. And you can release Alt once you have it selected, and then you can click it again, right? Alternatively, you can have it enabled so that you move. It's always snapping to stuff, right? It works best if I have two objects to show you how this works, right? So let's just make this one red. So let's say you select this and you want to move it. So you have O-snap on, so you're snapping to the points. You click yes, and then you can see you can then snap to it, any of these spots, because O-snap is still on. But if you hold Alt, now it's not snapping. I like to do the inverse, but it's all kind of your own personal preference. So I'm not holding Alt now, and now it allows me to just snap wherever I want. And you can stack things nicely and just kind of, stick things together appropriate to their various points, right? Cool. So that's kind of how snaps work. You just kind of have to get used to it and feel out which way you like to do it. A lot of what I'm showing you is my personal preference, so feel free to explore and see what works for you. Right. So that's kind of how modeling really, or just navigating works, and just kind of basic moving things around and all that. So again, you can do move, you could do a copy, right? Once you run the command, you can just place as many as you want. That, right? There's tons of different commands, but for the time and purposes of this video, move and copy are kind of all you really need to know for just moving some basic shapes around. Cool. So if you notice, I was clicking between these viewports. So these are viewports, right? So you have your top view, right? You got your perspective view. So let's say we made a box by typing box. You have your box right there. Let's just make it kind of exaggerated on one end so you can see, right? So the right view of the box, you see like a right elevation of it. Front view, you're going to see the front, right? So it's still tall. Top view is going to be narrow because, it's as if you're looking from the top of it, right? So you have like the right, front, top, or something like that. And of course, when you move it, it moves in each of them respective to the grid, right? Because the grid remains constant on all of these. Cool. So within each of these, you also have a series of different views, right? You'll see these are wireframe, or at least it's the wireframe setting here. That means you can see through it. It just shows the edges, whereas this is shaded, so you can't see through it. It's opaque, right? You can't see the other side. For example, if I were to make a red box, maybe like a flat red box here that goes kind of through it like that, you know, you're not going to be able to see that face of it, but in each of these views, you know, you can see it going through the blue one because wireframe is on. But if you turned on, say, like a shaded view, you know, now you can't really see what's happening. Same thing with this one, shaded. You can't see what's happening in between. There's certain advantages to that, but you'll kind of run into that later. Beyond that, there's some more advanced, there's like a rendered view where you can get some, you know, more shade and shadow to it. Ghosted is really cool because you can see what's going on between it, but it still has a solid face. So you can, it's easier to select actual faces, but you can see how they line up in between. You know, you can gauge how different surfaces line up that way. You know, X-ray. I mean, you can play with these all you want. Some of them are really weird. I really stick to shaded, wireframe, ghosted. Unless I'm producing any kind of graphics, then I might use a rendered or other view. But for the time being, shaded is a good way to just practice.